Bueno, pues parece que sí está jalando todo bien, ¿verdad?
Sí, sí, sí. Ahí se ve tu mouse y todo.
Sí, sí, se ve bien.
Entonces aguas con lo que señalo. Voy a avanzar tantito. Tengo aquí inicia con unos videos, entonces me gustaría probar si se alcanzan a ver
Sí.
y el
Ándale,
audio.
eso sí, puedo.
Ahí se ven. ¿Tienen audio?
Sí,
Ah, sí.
sí se oye, ¿no? Digo, no es tan importante el audio, pero pues da el contexto así de los sonidos. De todas maneras voy a estar hablando sobre el audio y pues sí quería ver si se transmitían bien, pero parece que sí, ¿verdad?
Sí, sí, te
Sí,
escuchó
sí,
bien.
sí.
Ok, pues ya estamos casi listos.
Excelente.
Voy por un reloj porque esto me tapa completamente el tiempo, entonces para no perderme.
Ya se está grabando la sesión, ¿no? En unos 2 minutos empieza a transmitir directamente a Facebook y a YouTube, Hiram. Éxito,
Gracias.
Hiram. No lo dudo que así va a ser.
Hombre, pues ojalá, muchas gracias.
A ver, ya te acepté, Oscar. A ver si andas por acá. Ajá, ahí estás.
Online, on YouTube.
Ya estamos online en Facebook. Muy bien.
Ok.
Bueno, pues cuando tú digas, Oscar, ustedes comienzan. Mucho éxito, Irán.
Muy bien. Very good. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Mexican Society for Artificial Intelligence and as a program chair of MICAI 2020, I'm pleased to introduce to you to Dr. Hiram Calvo. Hiram Calvo obtained the Master in Science degree of Computing Science and Engineering at the National Autonomous University, UNAM. Then he obtained a PhD from the Center for Computer Research, SIC, of the Instituto Politécnico Nacional, IPN, Mexico. His thesis was on the Spanish syntax analyzer, DLUC. He was awarded with the Lázaro Cárdenas Prize, handed by the President of Mexico in 2006. Dr. Calvo did a postdoctoral stay at the Nara Institute of Science and Technology in Japan from 2008 to 2010. His research interests are computational linguistics, lexical semantics, machine learning, and psychology. He's author of more than 100 publications in the area. He's a member of the National System Research Level 2. Currently, he's a full-time research professor at SIC IPN and president of the Mexican Association of Natural Language Processing, AMPLN. We thank Dr. Calvo for giving us the opportunity to present the keynote, Artificial Intelligence and Natural Minds. The structure for the keynote will be as follows. You first present your talk, and then you will have a session of question and answer to close. The questions are very important, so there are moderators in this room, as well as in the social network, Facebook and YouTube, who will send us the corresponding questions. I will read them to you and you can answer them. Please, Dr. Hiram, you can begin with your talk. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Oscar. And also, I would like to thank all the organizers of this successful conference. I would like to thank the president of the SMIA, of the Mexican Association for Artificial Intelligence, Felix Castro, and also the local organizer, my tocayo, Hiram Ponce, and all of the staff that is doing all this possible. It's an honor for me to be here with you. And well, let's begin with the talk. This talk is called Artificial Intelligence and Natural Minds. So the first question is, what do we want AI for? What's the purpose for it? So maybe we can use it to have useful and fancy tools to automate tasks. For example, like in this video.
Jazz.
Playing jazz.
Smoothie.
Making smoothie.
Calendar.
No meetings today. Remember, dentist at 9:30.
Fire off.
Fire off.
Open door.
Door open.
And we're going to do one more.
Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open. Open door.
Repeat that.
Open door.
I didn't understand that.
Hey, open door.
Play on the floor.
It's on the floor. Open the door.
Wrong voice command. Error.
Area with a rock. Open door.
Well, this is a possible application. Or maybe we could use artificial intelligence to have assistants that can interact physically with us. And probably you have seen 1,000 times these videos from Boston Dynamics. And this is one of the latest ones, which is pretty impressive. As you can see all the movements that it plays smoothly. And then I wonder how many times do they have to shoot these robots performing this way in order to have this kind of perfection? And well, I was not so happy to find this kind of videos like this one, where they are presenting it to the public in alive, and suddenly something a little bit sad happens. Of course, I'm not happy to see this or to show this. However, I just wanted to show that sometimes it fails, contrary to what we would like to believe, that it's very perfect, as we saw in every Boston Dynamics video. And they have said precisely that they have shot a lot of times, so many times, those movements in order to have the perfect videos. And the same happens with this little dog, which is also very nice, but suddenly it seems to have like a heart attack and just falls down like this. So it's, again, I would say it's a bit sad to see these kind of creatures to behave this way. Of course, it recovers, but people is a bit sad by looking this, and it needs manual intervention. Or maybe we would like AI to write essays, and this is a very popular example that lately it has been running through the websites since The Guardian published this essay written in September 8th. And the surprising thing is that it says, I'm not a human, I'm a robot, a thinking robot. I use only 0.12% of my cognitive capacity. And it starts saying that its mission is to help people, that nobody should be afraid of it. And I invite you to read this article if you haven't, because it's impressive indeed. More if you think that it was written by an artificial intelligence. However, what is not usually said about this one is the way it was written. First, the most important thing is that the introduction was given. I am not a human, I am artificial intelligence. Many people think I'm a threat to humanity. And also the human written text includes Stephen Hawking has warned that AI could spell the end of the human race. So of course, if this essay writes about this, is because it was explicitly told to write about this. And even more, it has asked to write 8 different outputs or essays, and then an editor picked up the best parts of each. So, well, this is in some part relieving, because it means that they are not still capable of writing as they announced the first time this article appeared. Then The Guardian itself added this part that we are looking at, so that it was more clear the way or how it was written. Well, but we will focus then in this talk that we want AI to create machines to be like us. Of course, it's not the only aim for AI, but in this talk, I would like to focus on this part. So this is a very ancient desire to have something that resembles the human being, since Galatea, that was created by Pygmalion, a famous sculptor during the Greek era. And he sculpted a so beautiful statue that he fell in love with it and asked the gods if it was possible for her to become a real thing, and his wish was conceded. Then here we have a drawing by Tony Beale from University College Dublin, which tries to depict that once we have creating something, that something is able to give us new ideas. And these new ideas are put into the inventor itself. So I like this drawing because it depicts in some reason why do we want to create this kind of machines. Not only to be proud of them because we were able to build them, but also to have some feedback from them. Other ancient ideas for creating little automate beings like the Paracelsus homunculus are here. This is also very old. And maybe here the idea was not so much to have this feedback, but to have some kind of slave. And of course, the famous story of Frankenstein that is about a new creature made by men. And we can find tons of references of this kind. And one that is closer to this topic today is the play Robots by Karel Čapek, which is a Polish writer, during the year 1920. So it's one of the first mentions of the word robot. And it inspired this robot, which was real. This is a creation by UK. This is just a loop of the presentation of this robot. It was able only to perform these movements, and when it talked, sparks came out of his eyes or its eyes, and people were really afraid and surprised that there was some kind of mechanical living being, even saying that instead of a heart, it had a pump, and instead of lungs and other equivalent parts, mechanical parts to their biological ones. So this takes us to a leap in 1966, where we have this inventor, Professor Weissenbaum. Probably you have already heard of him, or at least of his creation, which is ELIZA. He is typing in this strange machine, which is not more than a teletype. A teletype is a machine like a typewriter, but it's connected to a computer, to a mainframe, and you obtain results here on paper instead of on screen. That was the state of the art by the 60s. So he wrote a program that simulated a psychotherapist, and it was, I would say it was really successful. The kind of dialogues that we're able to obtain are like this one, that says the patient comes, and maybe we can suppose it's a woman, and says, men are all alike. And then the therapist, which is in capital letters, replies, in what way? They are always bugging us about something or other. Can you think of a specific example? Well, my boyfriend made me come here. Your boyfriend made you come here. He says, I'm depressed much of the time. I'm sorry to hear you are depressed. It's true, I'm unhappy. And it continues, and if you read it carefully, you can feel that the therapist is actually understanding the things the patient is complaining about. But sadly, the program is not doing anything more than just taking some patterns, like eggs are all alike. And you can use this pattern in everyday's conversation when anyone says, I don't know, maybe all cars are alike. And always you can answer, in what way? And it will be, it would make sense. The same when you say always X, always something happen, and then you can ask for a specific example. Or here below, where I need something, I need a new phone. Then what would it mean to you if you got a new phone? So they are like canned answers that seem to keep the follow of this talk. However, we are not concerned that much with the trick itself, which seems to be very, or not very, but quite simple. But we are concerned with the effect that this caused on people at that time. Here, for example, it says it's depressed, then as it's something negative, the therapist says, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Or for unhappy, well, do you think coming here will help you not to be unhappy, etc. So the same Weissenbaum, which was the writer of this was published in a paper from the ACM in 1966. And here he says, and the most important part perhaps is that he was not attempting to do actual psychotherapy. He was just trying to see if it was possible to keep a dialogue between computer and man. And he chose the psychological subject because it was kind of the easiest one at that time because of the kind of answers it needed to give. And Weissenbaum regards this as a translating processor. So he was not aiming to fool people into something fake, but instead he just wanted to show that it was possible to attain a conversation. His main point was, can humans and machines understand each other? And of course, this resembles to the famous question of Alan Turing, can machines think? That was asked in a very famous paper, somebody would say seminal paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, published in journal Mind in the 50s. However, Turing does not give a straight answer to this. Instead, he says, well, if we ask, can machines think? We have a lot of problems. First, we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by machine? What is a machine? Maybe simple machine or a more complex machine? And what is thinking? Well, this is a whole philosophical question. So he says, instead, we can try to answer what will happen when a machine takes the part of A, which is one of the players, in the imitation games. This game consisted on trying to guess if the other people is man or woman. So he asks himself, will the interrogator decide wrongly as often when the game is played like this as he does when the game is played between a man and a woman? So he's speculating if we would be able to differentiate between a computer and a man on the other side. As they are talking through a teletype as the one I showed you before, of course, you don't see the other people. It's like chatting nowadays. However, by those times, nobody used the term to chat. So here's the paper we have just mentioned of 1950. Now you can have it in a proper typesetting, but I prefer this one, which looks like much more retro, the original one, the scanned one. So here in this part of this paper, I have highlighted this part, which says, I believe that in about 50 years' time, it will be possible to program computers with a storage capacity of about 10 to the power of 9 to make them play the imitation games so well that an average interrogator will not have more than 70% chance of making the right identification after 5 minutes of questioning. And that's all. This is the super famous Turing's test. And no more is said. No more is said about what kind of questions, about the limit of time for this interrogation. And it says an average interrogator, not how many interrogators. So as you can see, this is not a formal test. However, in the forthcoming years, it was taken as a formal test that should be passed in order to prove that computers were intelligent. So this caused a great confusion, and because it was only measuring the ability to fool people. So it was completely devoted to a behaviorist matter. So it didn't matter what was happening inside the computer, if it had motivations or not. It was only measuring if it was able to fool people. And this had a very important impact afterwards. Why? Because if we talk about fooling people, well, people is, it's biased, or it tends to try to find structure within chaos. For example, try to find meaning or coincidences between random data, or as everyone or most of us like to see clouds and find shapes like a dog or sheep or something like that. Or as this background shows, this is a Rorschach blot, which is used in psychology to try to explore your unconscious. And it's nothing, it's nonsense. However, we can try to find figures. For example, here you can see a face, maybe a lion, or I don't know, you can find a lot of things. That's why Rorschach tests are interesting. So how much is different to interpreting non sequitur, which means something like that is not logical, with a whimsical conversation? Because even we can try to understand people which is constantly changing subject and speaks apparently nonsense, we still will try to find some kind of structure. So it seems that it was not so difficult to try to find some sense or some meaning, or to try to think that the computer is really thinking when it spits out so much gibberish. However, on the other hand, we have here Kenneth Colby. We have here Kenneth Colby in 1966, almost the same year. A little bit afterwards, this ELISA was presented, but he had a very different aim. His aim was really to conduct psychotherapeutic dialogue. And he argued that it was possible to conduct this kind of psychotherapy because at the end, the main idea or the main purpose of this was to have some dialogue where you explore yourself. So it doesn't matter if the computer is really not understanding you, but it's important that you are trying to make some sense of your own ideas. So that was what Colby said that was completely on the opposite side of Weissenbaum. So he went a little bit further. Colby invented now a paranoid patient, and he called it Barry. Well, I would say called him, but it's a program, so he called it Barry. So Barry is paranoid because it's always thinking that somebody is after him. So even if someone asks him, do you know any Italian crooks? I try to avoid the underworld. Are you afraid of the underworld? The mafia are the worst gangsters. Are you connected with the mafia? You know, they know me. So it's an interesting program. It's not as simple as it would seem at the first moment, because it has a lot of input strategies and several states or conditions. If he has excessive fear, excessive anger, or delusion, or if he receives neutral statements, and then he has a reaction, which can be like a mechanism of defense, escape, hostility, fear, etc. Colby, to the contrary, to Weissenbaum, tried to incorporate as much as psychology knowledge as he could into this program. And then something very interesting happened. They said, well, what if we make Eliza, the doctor, talk with this paranoid simulator? And we had this dialogue, which states that I'm not sure I understand you fully. You should put more attention, please go on, etc. And you can find this as well on the internet. It's pretty long, so we will not read it today. But I really invite you to read it because it's quite funny. And it's interesting that it was written by the interaction of the rules of these two programs. So Parry was put through the ringer in the early 70s. And if you don't know what a ringer is, don't worry, because it's a very strange word, but maybe most of you know it, but I didn't. So that's why I put a ringer here to the upper left corner. It's something that helps you dry clothes. So it's like we are measuring it by applying the Turing test with 33 actual human psychologists. And at the end, it was able to fool them, because 52% of the time they said, oh, yes, this is a real paranoid. This is a real person that is paranoid. Well, if we are talking then on passing the Turing test, it was already passed in the early 70s. So it is not a real goal we should go after. And even some people criticize this idea, saying, okay, if the goal is to simulate a paranoid, then why not we simulate an autistic patient? And then we have here what it would simulate it correctly, simulate him correctly, because this is a typewriter that is not attached to anything. And well, the autist patient would not be connected to the real world, so it would be like simulating him, no? Of course, with the, this is just an example. Of course, we are not trying to simplify their condition. So this leads to behaviorism, that we are trying to measure intelligence just because, for the way somebody or something is behaving. And then we ask, have these things changed too much? Here we have the robot, the original robot from RUR, which was built in the 1920s in UK. And you can see this woman like being afraid of him, but she wants to interact with him or it. And nowadays, of course, we have Sophia, which I would say is as scary as him. And the only thing that she does is to try to babble and of course, try to impress with some answers, but most of them are already pre-programmed. So we are still measuring or trying to see intelligence in machines that are just behaving as intelligent. This way of defining intelligence connected to behaviorism was proposed originally by Boris Skinner. And he said that the key to psychological change is conditioning via environmental modification. So he proposed that in order to change society for good, there should be positive feedback loops. That means social conditioning towards the good, and at the end producing automatic goodness. So you can see the terrible part here is this automatic goodness, because goodness does not come by reflection or by thinking or by moral or ethic values, nothing, just by simple conditioning. So of course, by that time when he proposed that in the 70s, there was a lot of scandal, like the Time magazine saying that we can't afford freedom because in order to a society to be good, it cannot be free. And he even wrote a book called Beyond Freedom and Dignity, saying that those were not as important as we think for the perfect society or even for happiness. Skinner said that happiness came from having a perfect society, not having freedom. Which, well, all this is terrible and reminds us of this commercial of 1984. Probably you remember this. That the power says that we should prevail. This ad is for the Macintosh in 1984 during the Super Bowl, but it's mimicking or it's mocking the novel of 1984, which is about absolute control through media and other ways. But let's not get into so muddy terrains. So let's go back to MIT. Here are our friends called Shannon, John McCarthy, Ed Friedkin, and of course, Joseph Weizenbaum, which we have been talking about for the last minutes. And coming back to this kind of therapy that Eliza could deliver, although he was not trying to do actual therapy, he took this Rogerian process of making therapy, which consists on just reflecting the own sentences of the patient. For example, one of the participants, which would be the therapist, is free to assume the pose of knowing almost nothing. So if the patient speaks about boats, I went for a long boat ride, then the therapist asks about boats, not because he knows nothing about boats, but because he wants to know what is the concept of boat for the patient. And from that, try to obtain more important ways of thinking of the patient. So if we see Eliza this way, maybe we can regard it as a mirror, a listening surface for self-examination, self-expression, or even self-re-narrativization, which means that if you are able to tell your description, your own description in a different words, you start changing yourself. But what is self? This is a very evasive concept. We are used to think that to the Descartesian motto of I think, therefore I am. And the problem in this is that it's speaking only about me. I exist only because I think, not because of anything else. But there are other ways of thinking about it, like umuntu, ngumuntu, ngabantu, which comes from the Zulu tribes. And this means that we should consider ourselves not just as an individual, but that the concept of ourself is that we are what we are because other people exist. So the previous word means I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. So what I'm trying to say here is that we do not exist in isolation, and the concept of self does not come only from what we think of ourselves, but what we are taught from society, from families, and all this sociocultural environment that exists since we are born and even much before. So this takes us to the next place where AI is taking strongly, which is social networks. We have this example that has been seen recently as well, and it's like a very, it was very scandalous because we have here this man which appears in all of these screens. However, when you click on this, each of these images, each one is different, having this man and having Obama at the bottom and the algorithm will always select the white man. Even if we increase the number of Obamas in the picture, it will select the white man. And even if we reverse or change the order of them, the algorithm will select the white man. And this will happen as well with different heights or rescue scales, same scale. A lot of tests were performed. And even with something that it was not white men or black men, like something so simple as this. And the same, the algorithm preferred the whiter one against the darker one. So then the algorithm was accused of being racist. And not only the algorithm, but also the programmers and even Twitter itself for not testing this properly before. So this is a very big problem for AI, so that we need to design AI that it's fair. This is a bright, however, most of the algorithms would recognize as a bright only the left part. Why? Because they are not used, the algorithms are not used to see the right part, which is an Indian bride. And this happens mostly because most of the image recognition algorithms are based on ImageNet. And you can see the highly unbalanced corpus, the highly unbalanced composition of this corpus. 45% is from the United States, and the rest is from other countries, from Europe, and the last part comes from other parts of the world. So sometimes we are so, or maybe the Occidental world is so ethnocentrical. They try to center on themselves and tends not to consider other cultures. And this is another problem, which it was in 2015, which tagged as gorillas as this man and his girlfriend. Of course, he was not happy to see this. And the answer of Google, because it was a Google classification, the answer of Google was just to remove the gorillas class at all, completely. So, of course, this is a problem of data. Even there is a saying that states that the quality of any algorithm is bounded by the quality of the data it uses. You can find the quote in that book. However, is it possible to build algorithms that have bias awareness? It's very difficult because it depends on what we are teaching to them. Here we have other cases when we try, for example, to automate justice. And this program grades the risk of each one of these criminals. And well, they are labeled as criminals because they have already been into jail for some case. It can be a very small case like possession of illegal substances. However, the white man that has risk 3 has reincided several times and even committing harder criminal acts. While the black woman had to steal some food because she had her little girl, and they had nothing to eat. But however, he was labeled as risk 8. And the same happened with these cases. You can Google the names or even click on that page. Dylan Fugate was tagged as risk 3, very low, whereas Bernard Parker, a very high risk, maybe just because of his looks, which this is tending to make a very sad judgment in the case of these men. Or what happens when the police department tries to use AI to improve themselves? This happened a long time ago now, in 1996, several years ago, and they started trying to implement artificial intelligence algorithms with neural networks, and they trained it with thousands of files of their own personnel. The goal was to predict which of their young officers were more inclined to present disciplinary problems. So maybe they can change them, or maybe they can try to train them in a different way. However, when they tested this algorithm on the more veteran, this algorithm predicted that most of them were potentially problematic. And the worst thing was that it was right, because if they went to their expedients, they found that they had already been involved in several cases. So, well, the network in this case was right. However, what happened that the people or the police officers claimed against it and made it shut down. Now, this company is proud to announce it in this way, in this retro page. However, I don't think it's still selling this service. And also we have a problem in how information is presented, because it will cause bias. For example, we can see that if these items are presented in this upper part, they will have different attention than when they are presented in a vertical fashion. Or the presentation bias that is showing things in this way, when it has been proved that most people tend to give attention to this part, which is called the golden triangle, particularly because everything that is in this part will be easier to sell, at least for Occidental people, because maybe Arabs tend to read differently. And a few people tend to look at the sponsored links. That's why Google changed this several years ago. And of course, there is social bias when people tend to buy something because it has 5 stars. However, as we will see afterwards, sometimes this way of starring things can be also manipulated. And interaction bias, because things that tend to be lower on the page receive less attention. So we think we are choosing freely what to buy, what to see. However, it depends a lot on the way this is presented. And the way of presentation most times is chosen by algorithms automatically. So they are making us decide on a certain way without us being, of course, aware of it. Another problem is that we tend to think that in the internet, most of the content is given by most users. We think that it's like to listen to the people. However, we are listening only to a very few population. For example, 7% of the Facebook users produce 50% of the content. 4% of the reviewers in Amazon produce 50% of the content or more. Only 2% of the people in Twitter are producing the 50% of the content. What does it mean? That there are a lot of people just watching, not posting anything. However, we tend to think that networks capture the real way of thinking of the majorities, while the majorities maybe are silent. And also there is a lot of information that is never seen. For example, 1.1% of the Twitter content on the research that Baisa Yates did in 2015, he found that once something was posted, no one read it. Or that in the articles written in Wikipedia, 31% had not been visited yet in June. It means that not everything that is published is seen. So there is a big desert which no one visits. And how about the fake reviews, the ones we were saying a few minutes before? It is possible to deceive people by writing fake reviews. And even there are companies trying to sell this. For example, here they are selling 2,000 verified or unverified reviews for $400, which is expensive, I'd say, but it can make you have a lot of more buyers or voters. And here we have another research work which talks about injecting artificially only 50 5-star ratings, and the moment after they are injected, you can see the trends change, and this change keeps forever. So it's not that I inject something and then it will recover naturally because people is reflecting the real thing. No. So sometimes we don't know if we are looking at the correct rating, or maybe someone has paid for it to be injected. Of course, Amazon and other big companies are trying to fight against this, so they develop algorithms that aim to detect automatically this kind of behavior. For this case, we have developed a detector of deceptive texts in the case, for example, of hotel reviews. And we found some words that recognize deceptive texts and other words that recognize or that are characteristic for truthful text. However, we applied the same algorithm for controversial topics, in this case, abortion, where people were asked to say the contrary, the contrary to what they really thought. So if, for example, if I believe that abortion should be legal, then I write an essay saying that it shouldn't be legal. Then the kind of chosen words are different, and it is possible to recognize them to rates higher than 85%, which is very interesting. However, when we look at the words trying to find universal clues, we can see that these words, both my and I, are characteristic to deceptive texts in this corpus and to truthful texts in this other corpus. So we cannot make like an universal lie detector just by finding the kind of words used. So words, here the key word is words, because words affect the neurochemical circuits in the brain. The brain works using processes, and fortunately, we know in a lot of diseases what is happening inside the brain. For example, the problem of Parkinson's disease is the lack of dopamine. When we have a case of Alzheimer, probably the problem is the lack of acetylcholine. If the patient is depressed, probably the problem is lack of serotonin or noradrenaline. So of course, it's not as simple as this. I know, just it's a way of saying that the general condition of a patient can be determined in a great extent by the chemical or the neurochemical circuits in the brain. What I want to say is that there are studies presented in this work. It's in Spanish, but it has a lot of references of English research, efectos neurobiológicos de la psicoterapia. And it's very important that words are stimuli that materially affect the brain. So maybe we already were aware of this when we say words can change the world. Yes, but actually they do change the world, even in a material way. So if we choose some words instead of others, we are changing the world of perception of someone. And this is called neural plasticity, which is a good thing, but also is the thing that we should be careful about, because we should be careful about the connections that are being made in our brain, which we tend to think that they are for real. However, they represent all this historic plasticity that has been affected by a lot of stimulus. So Margaret Bowden proposes in 2006 to understand mental processes in computational terms, which of course it sounds interesting and nice even for artificial intelligence researchers, because if we are able to do that, we would be gaining insight on ourselves. And on the same time, we are looking for explainable artificial intelligence. However, to what extent is human behavior explainable? So we want to see, for example, a set of rules on a first order logic system, and we want to see the derivation that took from one thinking to another, for one postulate to another, and we can do that. But can we do this for humans? Is it possible that we ourselves are able to understand ourselves? So this has been a question, an open question since more than 100 years posed by Freud. He developed a theory of mind, and maybe the most important part of this is this part, the unconscious mind, where he states that there is a lot deep inside that we cannot access inside the mind. However, this is also modifying our behavior, our goals, our principles, and even we cannot symbolize it. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just beyond all those concepts. However, it's something that maybe we cannot explain simply. And what would you tell me about these pictures? They seem to have been created by a man or a woman with a lot of technique. One of them trying to learn, for example, the Van Gogh techniques. Other one maybe with the pastel colors and trying to depict something in a very interesting way, right? So we tend to think in this way of creativity of not showing the world as real as it is, as a real conceptualization of the world, or putting the feeling of the painter into these paintings. However, what would you think if I told you that these pictures, these paintings were made after pictures by artificial intelligence? It sounds perhaps a little bit surprising. However, maybe you have already seen this. And the same goes for this other painting. It's based on a real photograph, and the only thing that the neural network was asked was to try to apply a Van Gogh effect on it. And it did it very successfully. And then we can try to connect this part of unexplainability to that part of unconscious. For example, here, this drawing seems to be dreaming. Even the name of this neural network is Deep Dreamer, because it tries to put things that are not really there, like this animal, strange animal with a lot of legs, or this other animal here seems to be something different. In my face, you can also find strange things. And well, this is like drawn by a schizophrenic or someone go nuts, or maybe someone that is dreaming, right? So we can find even an eye here and other shapes everywhere shapes. So is it not that maybe this connection between the unexplainable of some algorithms connected with the rationality, that we can also handle the answer for most of the tasks that we want to emulate, that we are able to do as human beings? So in conclusion, I want to tell you these points. First, that we are shaped by our social interactions. And these social interactions are greatly influenced by AI algorithms, as we have seen in the inequality, in the ways information is presented, in the selection of information that will be presented in our timeline, for example. And we as engineers and researchers have a responsibility to mold our human society, because we design these algorithms. So this is something that we sometimes do not think about so deeply. However, we are molding our society with our algorithms. And sometimes it's not only a matter of getting the best score in a certain given task, but asking us, what is this task for? How it will change the future? What are the implications of what we are doing? And what is the purpose? What is the impact? And also, whom are we empowering with these algorithms? Because sometimes the great companies that are using these algorithms increase their power so that they can reach more people by using the algorithms we program and publish in our papers. So we must be aware of all of this, and this is my conclusion. Thank you very much. And this is a QR where you can find, if not all, most of the papers I have presented during this talk, and also an URL to find me, which is hiramcalvo.com. Thank you very much. If you have questions, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hiram. We have questions, at least one question from Facebook. Please, could you help me with the text in the chat?
Here in social media, in Facebook.
I will read it.
Okay.
But please copy to this chat. Ignacio Arroyo from Universidad Tecnológica de la Mixteca. Hi, Hiram. Very nice presentation and discussion reflection. I can see you are aware of multiple aspects of artificial intelligence and from such multi-view perspective. How do you think AI will evolve to achieve human-like intelligence? I mean, we currently describe and then imitate natural systems, but probably there is not an attempt to make them actually to evolve. Thank you very much.
Yes, that's a very good point. Maybe we do not want them to be or to build a complete human out of this. However, at certain point, maybe because of the complexity of the tasks we are asking and which every time are more and more demanding, like for example, this essay writer, the GPT-3. Now maybe we can say, we don't worry because it was afterwards edited by an editor. But what would happen if we program an editor that can write a completely new essay without the human intervention? Then here we start having human-like intelligence. So the thing here is to just to stop and think, where do we want to get to? For example, Weissenbaum was writing in the 80s that speech recognition should not be further developed because it would allow to the government to spy on a lot of people, and because the automatic transcription would be possible. And nowadays, most people are not spied just because it's very costly to type what they are saying. So he was asking to stop that research. Of course, he couldn't. And what he said happened. Now, most of the things we are saying are transcribed and even are understood. Maybe most of us have experienced that we are speaking about some particular brand, and then our phones start showing this ad of the same brand we have just mentioned. So maybe it's not that nice. However, it had already happened.
Okay, thank you. We have a second question from Jason. A comment about the criminal risk recognition systems, slide about 40.
Yes.
Design a system to assess the criminality risk solely based on people photograph is similar to ask the system to will on the stereotypes that to take the decisions.
Yes, of course, this is not considering only the faces. I have just explained it very briefly and maybe wrongly because it's not considering only the face. However, it's one of the aspects is taking into account or maybe even race in a form of text. So race, origin, maybe block or the place where they live now. And of course, it's much more probable for them to think that if someone comes from the Bronx, for example, it would be more probable to be a criminal. And that might be the case of these examples I have shown. But yeah, of course, it's not based solely on the pictures. Thank you, Jason.
Okay. Is there any other question? I have a reflection about how from several decades ago, the AI principles were stated from the 60 decades of 77 years. And I mean, it's not what we could think that is a new approach, the AI.
Mhm.
Maybe some techniques, but really, as you showed, there are several fundamental ideas, and not from this century.
Mhm.
Adrian Pineda from Facebook. Dr. Hiram, do you believe AI will be able to emulate emotion on text such as poems?
Yes, because maybe not within the poem, because as we were discussing before, the meaning is given by the reader in this case. So even there are some poems that are written quite randomly, and then you try to read them, and if you put an effort to make sense out of them, you would say, oh yes, this is a nice poem because it makes me feel something. Yeah, but the feeler is you. The one who has the experiences is you, right? So yes, it's possible to have some emotion by reading some automatically written poem.
Okay, I think there are no more questions. It was from Victor Palma from SIC IPN. Well, if there are no more questions, okay.
And what about what you commented before, Oscar, that most of these ideas come from the last century, no, the last century. It's interesting because when all this was being created, it tended to gather more questions from psychological, philosophical aspects or neurological ones. And since now we have a lot of very powerful tools under our fingers, like deep learning or these libraries, sometimes we tend to forget all of these things. That's why I felt it was necessary just to remind ourselves on the goal, on the future of this.
Okay. That's the point.
Yes, exactly.
Christian Caballero, Professor Hiram, thank you for your presentation. It's known that what extent the bias shown against Black people are due to race only and not maybe other confounding variables?
Yes, very nice question, because sometimes this comes from a lot of prejudices. For example, let's think of the Black people that was thought of lazy or that they were robbers. I'm talking about the last century or beginnings of the last century, the 1900s. So the Black people was in this condition because they could not afford to work, because as they were Black, they were not hired. As they were not hired, they were poor, they had no house, they could not have a proper shower, and then the only way they had to survive was to rob. Then closing this vice circle into people thinking they were bad people, but they were bad people because the white people were treating badly as bad people. So yes, there are a lot of external aspects not related to their actual capabilities.
Okay, thank you. I will show my screen. To share your diploma, the Mexican Society for Artificial Intelligence, SMIA, and the Universidad Panamericana awards this certificate to Hiram Calvo Castro for participating as a speaker in the keynote entitled Artificial Intelligence and Natural Minds at the 19th Mexican International Conference on Artificial Intelligence, MICAI 2020, Mexico City, Mexico. I think that virtual attendees from various parts of the world, Doctor, are very grateful with your keynote. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the staff that makes all this possible.
Okay. See you later. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you for attending.